I'm Dr. T, and this is episode 3, Why Are Families Today So Stressed? Some people even claim that families are falling apart at an unprecedented rate. Well, let's look at the data. In 2022, the US ranked 7th in the world for divorce, and it is not the highest in the world, but it certainly is obviously in the top 10. We have historically had a very low divorce rate. It increased dramatically after 1960. The divorce rate actually hit its peak in 1980 and has declined slightly since. The actual divorce rate, it's not half of marriages as people claim. It's 43% for first marriages. It's a little bit higher for second, third, fourth, and subsequent marriages. And as you might guess, the divorce rate is linked to other social forces, other things that are happening out there in the world. Part of what happens in that time frame after 1960 is the women's movement that came out and said, women are people too, and they should be able to get an education. They should be able to work outside the home for money. They should be able to get a credit card in their own name, get a bank loan if they want to on their own, all of these things that women could not do at that time frame. And, Gloria Steinem was famous for saying a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle, meaning that women should not have to depend on men in order to live. So the women's movement is a big force pushing some divorce because women started to question their relationships and decide they wanted to live on their own. The other big shift is, of course, the shifts in the economy. That's the biggest one that we talked about last episode. And that really set off a chain reaction inside the family. That shift that we discussed, moving from a manufacturing based economy where the jobs paid really well to a service-based economy where the job paid much less well. That meant that women felt a lot of pressure to move into the workforce because men could not support a family on one salary. So this shifted what I call the conventional marital contract, meaning that for people who were able to live on one job, one paycheck, that meant that in heterosexual marriages, men were bringing home the income and women were taking care of the house and the children. That was sort of the deal. You've got your job, I've got mine, and we both do our jobs, and the family works out just fine. Well, once women start moving into the workforce, you now have 3 full-time jobs, his job, her job, and taking care of the house and children, but still only 2 people doing it. And you're just going to be stressed. There's no way around it. So there has been a lot of conflict in between husbands and wives over the work of the household, trying to get the chores done, trying to take care of children. And the expectations that we have historically from men and women around the household really shape this. So we have talked about women as being the best caretakers of young children. They are more nurturing naturally. That's a myth, but we're not going to unpack that this time. There's also a difference in the kind of chores that when men do chores, they seem to be very different. They tend to do sort of the outside chores, the lawn, the raking, snow removal, repairs, those kinds of things. Women are doing the cleaning, the cooking, the laundry, and the childcare taking. The things that men do have a little more discretion in their timing. The lawn doesn't absolutely have to be mowed every 7 days. Whereas if a child comes up to you with a dirty diaper, you can't say, tomorrow, that'll be your day. We'll do it then. Don't worry about it. So women do the kinds of chores that are more time pressured. They also tend to be the household organizers. They're the ones that have the list going in their head of all the things that need to be done. And that is what we call invisible labor. It's a kind of thing that nobody notices unless you don't do it. Nobody notices you made all the medical appointments unless you don't do it and people don't get to them. Nobody notices that you're the one that saw that your child's snow boots from last year are not going to fit before it snows this year, and you made sure they got new ones. They would just notice if they went to put their boots on and they didn't fit and they couldn't go outside or they weren't comfortable. So there's been a lot of research done on how men and women divide domestic labor. I am focusing here on heterosexual families, but of course these tensions exist in same-sex couples as well. They just don't have the same historical timeline that heterosexual marriages do. But men have typically, the research shows, just sort of refused to do household labor, especially in these early years, the 80s and 90s, like, it's not my job. If you want to work outside the home, fine, but you need to keep doing the work inside the home. They've also done things like feigned helplessness, doing a job, but doing it really poorly so that you're not asked to do it again. It's just easier from the woman's perspective to say, all right, it's just too much trouble to try to get you to do it. I'll just do it myself. Sometimes men will do sort of token contributions. They'll do the grilling. They'll play with the children, but they might refer to it as babysitting their own children as opposed to calling it parenting. The other thing that men will often do is point to other men who do less. Well, at least you're lucky because you have someone who does more than this guy over here. And so then women end up feeling grateful even though they're not getting what they really need. And again, this shows up in the research. Women, there's a huge gap between the amount of time that men spend on leisure, hobbies, things they like to do, and the time that women spend. Women often will report they have no hobbies, they have no time for any of that. Women report they get much less sleep than men do. And in some cases, when husbands don't do anything, their partners don't do much around the house at all, the women will talk about their partners as being another burden, another person that they have to care for in addition to their children. So what this points to is that we as a culture have expected the families to be a shock absorber for the social change associated with these giant shifts in the economy. And we've done absolutely nothing to help them. We really have done nothing on the federal level in terms of meaningful policy. We have the Family Medical Leave Act that's supposed to help, but you have to have worked in your job for a year. You have to be able to take time off without pay. There are a lot of restrictions. Oh, you have to work for a company with more than 50 employees, which half of people do not. So it doesn't even apply to them. So it's very difficult, especially what they need. Families need leave for not just new babies, but when their children are sick. A lot of people can't use sick days for when their children are homesick, and so they end up lying and saying they're sick. They struggle to find someone to care for their child if they have to go to work and they don't have that option. Maybe they don't have sick days themselves. We also need daycare assistance. Daycare is extremely expensive, as anybody with children who needs to use daycare will tell you. Now, lest you think I am dreaming the impossible dream here, I want to remind you that in World War II, when we needed women's labor for the war effort, like we need women's labor now to keep the economy moving, we had communal kitchens, we had communal laundries, and we had communal daycare. You could drop your child off for the daycare, go to work in the factories to support the war effort, come home, pick up your child, your laundry, and a hot meal. We have done it before. We could do it again if we choose. We'll come back to these issues because there's a lot that goes on inside the family that we need to understand. So stay tuned.